So welcome. We're going to try to keep this meeting under 40 minutes as always. Today we are just going to be talking about the process of when you obtain the buyer. What is the next step when a buyer contacts you and says, hey, I'm interested in buying a property, whether it's through phone, email, text, social media. What happens next? So obviously the first step is obtaining a customer, someone who is interested in buying a property. Okay, and I can email you these. These are steps that we've written down as we've gone through the process ourselves, and we keep adding to it and adding to it. So I can email this to you guys if you would like. Now, once the first point of contact is made, one of the first questions that we have to ask them without really asking them is, how are they going to pay for the home? So are they pre-approved? Are they going to be financing? Are they paying cash? I don't normally ask this question. I'm sorry about that. I normally don't ask this question like off the bat. When I start talking to them, I ask them this question usually a little later, but I do not start working with a customer without knowing what their circumstances are. So I've put here some example questions that you can ask them, like, okay, instead of me saying, are you buying cash or you're gonna finance? Because to me that seems a little like abrupt and a little rude. I actually say, do you have a copy of your pre-approval letter? Because when we start looking for properties, the seller will require a pre-approval letter. And then just by asking that, sometimes they say, oh no, I haven't been pre-approved, or oh no, I'm buying cash. And then that kind of gives you the answer, but in a different way. Just some people are touchy about this kind of things, and we don't want to insult anybody. Our main goal is just to help buyers, find their investment property or their dream property the best way that we can, and get our 5-star reviews that we always want, right? So that's the first step that we do when we get a customer. Always obtain their first name, last name, phone number, and email address, because you have to have a way of contacting them. And sometimes you forget, like if you're texting someone, you forget how you're contacting that person, or if you're doing it via social media. It's sometimes easier to get someone on the phone and talk to them and explain the process to them. Once you understand their situation and what they're going through and what their finances look like, then you can kind of help them figure out what's the best program for them, or if there's any down payment assistance or anything like that available. Then it's easier for you to know if you know the backstory. And through text and email, it's very hard to figure that out. Okay. Typically when you try to schedule a meeting with a buyer, face to face is the best way to get them to when they're making their biggest investment, right? This is going to be, and this is everyone's biggest investment, purchasing real estate. So you want them to trust you. They need to be able to trust you. You need to create that relationship with them. So if you can get them face to face, if you can meet them either at the office, or if you can meet them at the property, it's better that way, because even though we've lost this recently because of social media and COVID and all that stuff, it's a different feeling when you actually talk to someone. And that's why we do these video Zoom calls, because we can do this over the phone as well, but it's not the same thing seeing a face than signing your life away for someone you've never even met before. Now, once you have that pre-approval in hand, if it is being financed, if it's not being financed, you want to ask for proof of funds. What does that mean? Proof of funds is just maybe a bank statement or a screenshot of a bank statement with that buyer's name on there, showing, hey, they have enough money in the bank. They can black out everything else that they don't, like every other transaction that's on the bank statement, if they don't want us to see where they spend their money. But we just need the balance, the date of the bank statement, and their name on there. And then most sellers accept that. If not, then we just need the pre-approval if they're being financed. Usually this comes from a lender. If they have not been pre-approved, then this is a time where you can refer them a few loan officers and say, if you don't have any loan officers, here's a list of loan officers that we have, that we are used to working with and that we know that do a good job. Contact them. And then at that point, obviously you have to wait for the pre-approval to come back. When you obtain the pre-approval, something that's very important for agents, especially new agents, to understand is there's a few things you need to know on this pre-approval. So normally the pre-approval will tell you, okay, you're pre-approved for this sale price at this interest rate, right? Some loan officers include if it's FHA, if it's conventional. What they don't include is what property taxes they used as a pre-approval, if they used any HOA fees or dues on that pre-approval, how much insurance cost they used on that pre-approval, and if they used flood insurance on that pre-approval. Why is this important? If you have a customer that's pre-approved, let's say at $500,000, and they're pre-approved with monthly cost of, let's say, those 4 items that I mentioned at $100 a month. If you find them a house that's $500,000, but the property taxes instead of $100 a month are $200 a month, that can make or break your deal. So you may be showing them properties, 1, that they're not pre-approved for, and 2, you may be writing offers on properties they're not pre-approved for. So you don't want to write up a contract on a property or an offer on a property that it becomes executed, which means every party has signed, the sellers, the buyer, everyone has signed, and then when you send it to the bank, they're like, they don't qualify for this house. You don't want to be in that situation. And unfortunately, most loan officers they give you the pre-approval. Here's the pre-approval. Here, you're pre-approved for $500,000, but they don't tell you those specifics. Something important to ask that loan officer is, what interest rate did you use to use this approval? In the market that we're in currently, interest rates are increasing and they keep increasing. So you could receive a pre-approval, or you could have received a pre-approval 2 months ago with maybe a 6% interest rate. Well, maybe today that's a 7.5% interest rate. Why is that important? That increases the monthly payment of your buyer. So if it went from a 6% to a 7.5%, they may no longer qualify for that amount of a loan anymore. So you have to go back to the loan officer and say, okay, last time you said, they were pre-approved for $500 with a 6% interest rate. What would today's interest rate be? And what would be the new pre-approval? Now, that being said, sometimes it doesn't take a buyer that long to find a property, so you're okay. But we have a customer in the office that their pre-approval just dropped $30,000 just because the interest rates went up. So very, very important that when you get that pre-approval letter, you reach back out to that loan officer and you say, hey, I got the pre-approval letter, thank you, but I need to know also the specifics on it. What property taxes you use, what HOA did you use, if any, what insurance amount did you use, what flood amount did you use, and what interest rate did you use. And then just write that in the file, and whenever you show properties, make sure that you're using those quotes to see if your customer qualifies for that. So you get the pre-approval, you get the proof of funds in your hand. What's the next step? Well, this usually is the funnest part, looking for a house for your customers. What normally we like to do is we try to obtain, I always tell agents this, when buyers come to you, they always have this dream at hand. It's very rare that someone comes to you with realistic aspirations, I guess. So they tell you, okay, I want a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in this specific schooling. I want it to have a pool. And they tell you the criteria, and then they say, you get this pre-approval for $500,000. But then when you put that criteria into the MLS, there's houses of what they're looking for with that criteria. However, it's worth $600,000. So without insulting them, without getting upset, little by little, we have to talk to them and tell them, okay, what you've given me, there's no house within your price range. So what criteria that you've given me are you willing to give up? What are deal breakers for you? And try to understand your customer. Sometimes we can't find the perfect home for them, but at least we know that we're trying, right? So very important for you at this point to get that information from them. Is there something specific that they're looking for? We have customers that want golfing community and golfing amenities. If you're selling golf course communities, homes, be very careful with those, because some of them are bundled, some of them are not. Some of them are mandatory membership, some of them are not, some of them are public. So just make sure if you're doing golf course that you're also looking into those things. And know the area. If you don't know the area in which a buyer of yours is looking in, find an agent in the office that knows the area. Get together with them so you give your customer the best service that you can at all times, okay? Something really easy for you guys to do is tell them, go to our website and register for free. They will have full access to our MLS. And the good thing about that is every time they put a little note in there like, oh, I like this home, or can we see this home, it emails us and it tells us about that. You can do this on the MLS as well, because I'm the only one who has access to our website. So if you want more one-on-one with your customers, well, you can go on the MLS and you can set them up on automatic emails. And every time that something with their criteria comes out on the market, it automatically sends them an email. At that point, they can go into the portal that the MLS provides and they can put notes in there. They can put a little heart if they like it. They can click on the little trash icon that says, I really don't like this one. Or I think it's a light bulb that you can put like, maybe this one. And you guys can kind of communicate back and forth that way. Always have open communication with your customer, because at the end of the day, we have to do what's best for them. Okay, not what's best for us, what's best for them. And you will have better results in your business that way as well. Now, once they start saying, okay, you know what, here is 5 properties that I want to go take a look at. Obviously, the next step is, okay, let's look at the MLS and let's look at the access instructions. Sometimes they're vacant, sometimes they're occupied, sometimes they're owner occupied or tenant occupied. Read the comments, read the confidential remarks, and read everything in its entirety before you schedule. There's something called showing time on our coast that you can schedule right through the MLS. Some agents don't like it, some agents don't use it. I would say 5% of them don't use it. So you actually have to call the listing agent, text them, or email them. If you guys run into a problem with agents that do not respond to their text messages, emails, or phone call or emails, please let me know and I will get involved. Unfortunately, we have a huge problem with that in this town, and some agents just don't. I don't know why, but they don't want to answer the phone. So if they don't do that, we can't access the property. Now, when you go to the property, very important, make sure if they tell you it's vacant, still knock on the door. If they tell you the homeowners are not going to be there or the tenants are not going to be there, still knock on the door. I've walked in on people and they forgot to tell them, or we don't have communication with the homeowner, so we don't know what their agent is doing. So always be mindful, always be courteous. If there's pets, don't let them out. And I always leave 2 business cards on top of the kitchen. It sounds silly, but actually I think one of the agents on this call today got a customer because she left 2 business cards at one of the showings she did, and somebody walked in and didn't like their agent and picked up her card and called her, and she actually got a transaction that way. So that's the only reason why I leave 2 cards, because you never know. But I always leave my card so whoever lives in the property and whoever their listing agent is knows that I was there. Okay, so get into the habit of always having your business cards on you. You never know what happens. Like I said, I've walked into properties and the tenants didn't even know I was going. So just be courteous at that point. If that happens, just call the listing agent, text them, or email them, whichever way they respond quicker, and say, listen, I'm here at this property, they're not letting me in, what's going on? And get me involved as well, because those issues can escalate very quickly. Something important to talk about too is how you present yourself to your customers. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, dress a certain way, or don't wear this or don't wear that, but always try to dress appropriate. Try to dress professional. Be ethical. Don't say things that you shouldn't say. Behave in a manner that you would in front of the President of the United States or someone that you respect, because you aren't a real estate professional. At the end of the day, when you walk into a room, everybody looks at, oh, I'm a realtor. It matters. They, believe it or not, they look at everything from your head to your toes. So dress appropriately. Don't go in your bathing suits. Don't go in bikinis. Don't go in flip flops. I don't even go in gym clothes. I've had realtors show up in gym clothes. I don't think that's professional. I don't. Maria here at the office said to me one day, you have to dress the part you want. So you want to be successful, you want to sell a lot of real estate, dress like it, okay? You never know. Sometimes we come in the office and we're not feeling well, and we dress a certain way. Well, you never know when you're gonna have a customer walk in. So this is just my opinion. I've never had issues with it, and I've heard bad stuff about other agents who have not dressed appropriately. So this is just my opinion. As like I said, I've never had an issue here in the office with anybody though. Now, once they say, okay, you go show all these properties, you schedule all these appointments, and they say, you know what, I found a property. This is a property I'm interested in. I want to submit an offer. There's different things that's important for you guys to know. In Naples, okay, there are 2 different contracts. Well, there's actually like 4 different contracts that you can use. But there's 2 different formats. There's one that's called the neighbor contract, and there's one that's called the FAR/BAR contract. Now, each one of those also has an as-is contract. So there's a regular contract for neighbor, and then an as-is, and then there's a FAR/BAR contract, and then there's an as-is FAR/BAR contract. In the listing, sometimes listing agents say the seller prefers that you use a FAR/BAR as-is contract, or the seller prefers you use a neighbor as-is contract. Make sure you're reading those comments, because sometimes you go through the trouble of writing a nice little contract, sending it to this buyer to sign. When you send it to the listing agent, guess what? They say this isn't the right contract. On the listing, I said I wanted this one, or not I, but the seller wanted this one. Sometimes they don't say anything at all, and then you write what you think is best for your customer, or you ask your customer, hey, what would you prefer us write? And then they tell you what they prefer, what contract they prefer. They're very different. I can't get into explaining what makes them different, but each one of these contracts are very, very different. So just be careful. We're not attorneys. We don't act like attorneys, and you want to make sure your customers know that. If they have a question that an attorney should be answering, refer them to an attorney. We have a list of attorneys we can refer them to, and then you're not liable for those questions. Okay, just be very careful, because we are consultants. At the end of the day, we're advising them, and we're giving them opinion based on our experience, based on our expertise. But you need to be careful, because there's a thin line there. And I know attorneys that they say, I don't know how they make realtors write these contracts, because in essence, it seems like we're acting as attorneys. So just be careful, because we're not attorneys. Unless you're a licensed attorney, you should not be giving any real estate advice like that. So we say, okay, it's going to be a FAR/BAR contract or a FAR/BAR as is. We have a checklist here in the office of not just the contract that you need, a list of disclosures that you also need. And I can provide that to you if you don't have it. For example, now we have one for Hurricane Ian. And we're just advising everyone, hey, we had a hurricane, we advise you to double check everything and make sure that what you're buying, what you're buying. Not every property got flooded, not every property got destroyed, but still, it like I said, we're professionals, and it's our job just to advise them. We advise you to just double check everything is right and hire a professional contractor or inspector to check everything out for you. So we put all those forms together, we send it to the buyer, they get it signed, right? Normally we do this through e-sign, which is a portal that we have through the MLS. In the external links in the MLS, there's something called Simplicity that you click on, and then it takes you to another portal where you can write up all these contracts and get everything typed. From there, you send it to e-sign to your buyers. They sign. Once they sign, it automatically sends you an email back saying, hey, all the parties have purchased. Now, if there's one buyer, then you only have to do this with one person, obviously. But if there's 3 buyers or 2 buyers, which typically there's about 2 buyers, You have to make sure you get 2 different email addresses and you send it to both of them to sign. Unless they have a power of attorney, no one can sign for anyone. Make sure you don't get into that debate either. If they have a power of attorney, make sure you're careful with those as well, because there's limited powers of attorney. Now you get all these documents back. The only ones that go to the listing agent are the ones that the seller has to sign. And when you see these documents, you'll see why I'm telling you. So the rest of the documents are just in-house documents or state documents that buyer have to sign, and they stay with us. Do not send all of those documents to the listing agent. They only need to see the ones the seller has to sign. Okay. I do need the file to me within 48 hours after everything is executed. So if you write 10 offers, I don't want 10 contracts. All I need is, once it's executed, then a copy of the whole entire file. Okay. It can be a physical file, it can be a digital file. Most of you work remote and don't come into the office very often, so if you do a digital file, that's more than okay. The department allows that. Now, you get into a negotiation with the seller. You guys finalize a number. Everyone is good. You have an executed contract. On most of the contracts, we put that the buyer is going to do a deposit of, let's say, $1,000 within 3 days. Be very careful when you're writing your contracts. That's something negotiable. And when you're representing the seller, be very careful accepting contracts, because that can say 1 day, that can say 10 days, that can say 23 days. The norm, the typical amount of days is 3 days. But you need to know when your buyer needs to submit that deposit, that escrow, that they've said, okay, I'm going to give you $3,000 to show you that I am really interested in this property. Well, that I don't hold escrow, so that normally goes to a title company or an attorney that will hold that escrow until the day of closing. You will have to get either wiring instructions from the title company or the attorney, wherever the closing is going to be, whatever location, whatever title company was chosen. The title company is negotiable. So whoever pays for title is who chooses title. If the buyer is paying for title, they get to choose the title company. If the seller's paying for title, the sellers get to choose the title company. In Collier County, it's typically the buyer who chooses title. In Lee County, it's usually the seller. Again, that's negotiable. But you need to talk about that at negotiation process, not after it's executed. Before, when you're doing the offer, that's when you need to talk about it. Okay, be careful with that, because we've had issues with that as well. So they turn in their deposit. Let's say it was $1,000. They turned it in. Okay, what do I do next? We recommend every single buyer get a full inspection done on their property. That we don't do that. We know people who do. We refer them to several inspectors. What does the inspector look for? They look for problems with roof. They look for electrical problems. They look for leaks. They look for any little thing, even if it's a new construction. People think, oh, it's just a new construction. What are they going to find? Even if it's new construction, I suggest your buyer gets an inspection. They do not have to. Whether they're financing or buying cash, they do not have to get an inspection. I always recommend them, and I normally try to convince them, because it's less liability on us and the buyers know what they're buying. So if it's a good inspector, they're going to find something. That is normal protocol. They will find something. But I had a buyer who was buying a duplex, and they listened. They got an inspection done. Well, thank God they got an inspection done. The walls on one of the units, it was a multifamily unit, on one of the units was full of water. It was to the point there was a huge leak, and it was to the point that the walls on the bottom by the baseboard were starting to bubble. Well, that would have cost her over $100,000 to fix. So we were able to cancel the contract on that point, because it wasn't worth the wait. But if we wouldn't have gotten an inspection, she would have never known until it was too late. So we were able to get out of that. So be very careful with this. And if a customer tells you, no, it looks great, I don't need to spend the I don't know, $400 or $500 that an inspection costs. Try to convince them to do it because it will save them thousands of dollars. It could save them thousands of dollars along the way. But again, it's not required by the lender. It's not required by anyone. It's just, it's a choice. And there's different types of inspections that your customer can do as well. I can't get into too many of the specifics right now because we don't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of different inspections out there. There's radon, there's mold, there's the full inspection, there's electric inspections. There's a whole lot of inspections that they can do, but a full inspection will probably give them a good idea of, anything that's wrong with the house. Now, if they let's say they do the inspection and it comes back that the roof needs to be changed. If it's an old roof and there's a leak, at this time we have to renegotiate with the sellers. Either they get the roof fixed, depending on what contract you wrote, whether it was as is or just a regular contract, or if it was neighbor or far bar. Some of the contracts make the seller fix a roof leak, but some of them don't. So then we have to go back and figure out if it's going to break the deal, because if it's financed, the insurance companies will not give the buyer insurance, so then they can't close on the property. And sometimes we can say fix it, sometimes we can say okay, give us a credit. Like if it's a minimal thing, like I don't know, there's the toilet is loose and it's going to cause a leak in the future and it's going to cost us $1,000 to fix it. Well, the seller can just say, you know what, I'll give you $1,000 at closing, and that's it. So there's a lot of negotiation that happens at that point as well, that it just depends on what the items, what the issues are and what the items need to be repaired are. But is that something that gets done at that time? Now, if your buyer says this is too much for me and I want to walk away, as long as if you're within your inspection time period and you write it down and send the proper notifications, the proper way with emails and addendums and things like that, your buyer will be able to get the deposit back, but not the money they spent on the inspection. If they've already paid for appraisal, they're not getting it back. So they will get their deposit back, but not the other items, because those are third-party services that were already performed. Okay, now, usually once you execute that contract, you want to send it to the title company and you want to send it to the lender. The lender at this point should have already submitted the loan and should have already started the loan application. Now, some of them wait until the inspection period is over, because then they'll start the whole process and have to cancel if the buyer walks away from it. It just depends on what lender you're using. But let's say we finish the inspection period. Then comes the appraisal. The loan officer usually does this with the bank. They order the appraisal. We need to get the appraiser access to inside the property. It will need a survey ordered as well. The title company usually does this though. But it is our job to make sure that everything is being done when it should be done. If it's in a flood zone, in one of the contracts it says that the buyer has up to 20 days before closing to cancel if the flood insurance is too high. So if your customer is in a flood zone, try to refer them to some insurance companies. Try to get them to get some flood insurance quotes. We've seen them as low as $1,000 a year. We've seen them as high as $4,000 a year. So that can break your deal. And it's better to find out things earlier on in the transaction than later on in the transaction. So, these are little things that, even though they're not necessarily our job is to make sure everyone's happy, your customer's taken care of, and everybody else is doing their job. So, unfortunately, some agents don't like this, but it is what it is. Now, once your loan officer says, we've received all the conditions, this file is clear to close. That's the best 3 words we can hear in a transaction. That's the happiest moment for us, because you never know when you're financing. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, so you never know. Okay, now, you tell all the parties, you tell your listing agent, hey, the property is clear to close. Usually we already have a scheduled date to close. If not, then at that point we gotta figure out a time that your buyer can go and sign the documents, and the listing agent will take care of getting the seller. Now, at closing, 3 days before your closing date, the loan officer has to send something called the closing disclosure. As of right now, this is the rule. It could change in the future because this was something that came about a few years ago. This wasn't always the case, but this is something new in Florida that came out. There's something called the closing disclosure the loan officer has to send to the buyer 3 days before closing. If the loan officer fails to do that, we are not closing. That's a law and it has to be followed. Now, guess what I do to make sure my deals get done? I call my loan officer and I said, did you send the closing disclosure? Are we good? Because they're human and they forget to, and they have a lot of files they're working on too. I do the same thing. Once the interest rate is locked for my buyer, I ask the loan officer, when does it expire? I write down that date that's another date I write down on the calendar, because I want to make sure that interest rate does not expire. So on the date it expires, I call the loan officer, did we do an extension? Have we taken care of it? You do not want, with the market that we're in right now where the interest rates are increasing, you do not want your buyer's interest rate to expire. And like I said, it's not our job to do that, but it is our job to do what's best for our customer. So we remind the loan officer, has it been done? And usually buyers have to pay money to extend it. They just have to be aware that, hey, you're gonna have this fee at closing because we had to extend but they're okay with it because it's cheaper to do that than to get the higher interest rate. When you're looking at the documents for closing, like I said, the closing disclosure is 3 days before closing. The next step is the HUD or ALTA, or closing statement. This is different than a closing disclosure, okay? Your HUD or ALTA is a document that shows closing costs for the buyer, usually, and the seller. Sometimes they send us just the buyer side, but it tells you everything. It tells you the sale price for the contract, any credit that we're getting back from the seller, the amount for the deposits, the loan amount, and every single amount of closing costs that will incur. For example, we charge $195 processing fee. That should be on the ALTA. We need to verify that our commissions are correct. I just had one last week that my commission was not correct. They were taking $2,000 from me. So I had them updated, but thank God I noticed before closing. Always try to check it the day before closing. At the end, once the title company and the loan officer are balanced, they send out the ALTAs to the agents to double check. Once we have approved, the selling agent and the listing agent has approved the ALTA, then at that point, we can give the final numbers to the buyer and tell them, hey, listen, you're going to have to bring $3,200 the day of closing. Unfortunately, they cannot actually bring that money. They have to wire that money. No title company will allow you to bring a check or cashier's check or money order like back in the days. Now everything has to be wired. So you want to make sure that you have those numbers the day before closing. So the day of closing, your buyer's not running around trying to do the wire. At that point, then the buyer does the wire to the title company, and then you guys can go and close at the title company. The closing usually takes about an hour or so. And in some cases, when the title company doesn't do what they're supposed to, it could take a little longer. But excuse me, title companies usually do a good job and get everything done. Now, some title companies will give you your commission checks at closing. You can choose for them to mail it to the office, or you can choose to pick it up at a different time. It is up to you, and they usually ask you what you prefer. But either way, we need a copy of the executed ALTA with the commission checks. Without that, I can't give you a check because we have to keep it for our records by law. So hopefully this helps you a little bit. Is there anything you would like to add?
Sometimes, depending on the title company, it might be better to take your own.
That is a good point. So she just had a disaster closing, and the reason we let the seller pick the title company is because we were representing the buyers. When the seller picks the title company, they pay for title. So in order to save the buyer that money for title, the seller chose the title company. Well, we've learned that sometimes it's better for our customers to pick the title company because it was a disaster. They didn't have any paperwork on time. Because of them, we had to close like 2 weeks later to the point that they didn't even sign our commission check. We had to go back to get that signed. So that's a very good point. That's something fresh that just happened today. So she's got personal feelings about it. But it is a good idea. If you have any other questions, we're out of time for today. But if you have any other questions, please reach out to me and let me know how I can help you. And let's get some deals closed. Bye. Thank you.